Muy buenos días, friends of the Museum of South Texas History. My name is Francisco Guajardo. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the museum. And so we welcome you to the March 2024 installment of Museum Pláticas. Super excited about today because we have with us somebody of great distinction, a woman from the borderland who in 2022, I think it was, it may have been another year, but I think it was 2022, received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. That's from the President of the United States. That happens to a very, very small number of people in this country when you receive that kind of distinction. And so that distinction doesn't just happen. It happens because of a lifetime of achievement and a lifetime of important work, meaningful work to this country. And so the person I'm speaking of is Julieta García, who was a president of a university and has done so much more in life. And so she will be here to talk about not only her life story as I probe the life story, but also to talk about Women's History Month, because March is Women's History Month, and it is important that we celebrate, commemorate, reflect on it, understand it in our own way here, mostly guided by the stories of our guests. And so today it is Julieta García. So when we come back, we will engage in our first segment, which will be the biography of Julieta García. And then we will do a third segment. So this is the first segment, the introductory one. And we'll do the last segment on Women's History Month. So stay with us. I expect to be engaged here in an interesting, compelling, and riveting plática. Stay with us.
Value to the government.
Enterré oro bajo de la casa. Úsalo para cuidar a tu hermano.
I found gold.
That's my gold.
That's my father's gold.
The jury finds the true owner to be...
It's a story filled with mystery, intrigue, and one's birthright. Dr. Garcia's gold exhibit is on display at the Museum of South Texas History. Go to mosthistory.org for more information.
Okay, welcome back to Museum Pláticas. Francisco Guajardo here with my guest, Julieta García. Julieta, how are you?
I'm good. Thank
It's
you.
so good to
Thank
see
you for the
you.
invitation to be here. It's a real pleasure.
I wonder, when you were in the White House and President Biden awarded you with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Number one, what were you thinking at that moment? Because, I mean, you were thinking a lot when you received the first communication, right? Which was what? But then as you're thinking about this, because very few people really receive this kind of recognition, what you were thinking and then how you spoke it. For those who maybe have not been privy to that experience that you had in the White House, can you share what it was that you were thinking and what you said as like foundational reasons for why you were there that one day?
Well, thank you first for the invitation to be here. It's really an honor, and your museum is wonderful, and I thank you for all the work that you're doing to make sure the community appreciates and understands this history, our history. When I was told, when I got the first call, I was out in the garden, and so missed the call, missed it twice. So by the time I got the third call, the young lady said, the president would like to talk to you. And I thought, oh, sure. Okay, what president? And she says, President Biden, but he missed you, and he's on his way to the summit, the G7 summit. So he asked me to call you. My name is Chrissy Chavez. She was the granddaughter of Cesar Chavez. Well, that was enough to make up for not having talked to President Biden. And she told me, and I immediately, and your listeners will appreciate this, I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to lose weight and look really good. And how long do I have? And she said, yes. And she said, and the presentation will be in 2 weeks. And I thought, well, there goes the weight. I'm going as is. So it's very surreal. And you think someone made a mistake. And then you're wondering who did it. And never found out, by the way. Never found out.
What do you mean? Who nominated you?
How I got to that moment. And I've asked, and I've tried, and
it's very secretive.
I don't know how that happened. But
wow.
At any rate, so then it was to get the family there. And I tell you that because you don't do these things by yourself. You don't get to just leave to go to DC by yourself. And so I have 2 children. I have 5 grandchildren and a husband of more than 55 years. And so then it was, they said you could have 5 guests. And my son said, and how are you going to decide, Mother, who doesn't go? It's like, oh, thanks. So I had to work the deal so that I could get more guests. So we all went. Everybody went. And this is during COVID. And so there were lots of questions about, can we get everybody over there with, at the same time? They're some off in college, other places, and some here, some little, some older, and COVID free. And so that day that we went to the White House, we all had to test for COVID. And Dios es muy grande, and angels abound, because we all tested negative for COVID that morning and were able to go in. Denzel Washington was one of the other recipients, and he tested positive for COVID. People were very disappointed that he was not there, obviously. But so just to get the family there and present at that moment, somehow for me, it put everything else kind of in the background. It was just first, can we pull this off as a family? We did, and then we're there, and I've been to the White House before. I don't say that to be presumida or arrogant, but I have, and so, but I wasn't on a tour this time, or I wasn't meeting it for a conference with someone. This was extraordinarily difficult and different. And I was supposed to have surgery, little known fact, that week for a hip replacement. So I said, I'm not doing this in a wheelchair at all. So I was just wanting to make sure I could move without a wheelchair and get up the stairs and down the stairs. So there were lots of other things going on that day that had nothing to do with the honor. But then there was the moment, and it was handled beautifully by the White House. That's another thing. The person who is the social secretary for the White House is from the Valley. And he, of course, gave us special treatment. And by the time everybody else had left the reception, it was my little family with him that sat there and had the last sip of champagne because he wanted us to be with him and con familia. So there are angels all over the place that help you through. So what did it feel like? Well, the most wonderful moment for me was when I returned and people would want to congratulate me. And they'd say, "We did good work." They didn't say, "You got recognized." They didn't say, "How wonderful that you got the medal." They said, "We did good work." Well, that's what we were trying to do, isn't it? And at the university, we were builders and we were visionaries in many ways. And then we had a chance to really pull it off. But none of us, all of us realized none of us did it by ourselves. There's no way. I started a physics program at the university. I know how to spell physics, and the physicist taught me enough to where I could make a pitch about gravitational wave astronomy. But I don't know physics. I don't know chess. I know how to play it now. But we started what is now this phenomenal chess infection and with people who knew chess. So you don't do this work by yourself. And for me, this reconocimiento was affirmation in full bloom that people working together toward one vision and good work, noble work, not for any one of us to get a congressional medal, but because it was important work and it fell to us to be about the business of getting it done.
In that moment, how did you think about your parents?
My parents never got to go to college, and they should have. When I met Américo Paredes for the first time, he said, "¿De quién eres?" as people are prone to say. And I said, "Soy hija de Romeo Villarreal y Seguirre."
By the way, "de quién eres" as people are prone to say, as people were prone to
that's
say.
Right. Thank you.
Because,
That's right.
You've
Yes,
seen that, right?
yes,
It's like
yes.
the curiosity about de qué familia vienes seems to almost be a thing of the past.
Yes, you don't want to be rude or metiche or too,
Or maybe not have the same kind of curiosity about, who you're interacting with. I'm saying that because it makes perfect sense that Don Americo would have said this, that you would say it, because to commemorate him, but also
Yes.
as a way of being in a certain time in history. And I would hope that we continue to nurture that kind of curiosity.
It's beautiful.
But I think we got a ways to go
I think so.
in nurturing it. But continue.
So anyway, when I met him, he asked me that, and I knew exactly what he meant.
Mm-hmm.
And he is from Brownsville, and so when he knew that I was from Brownsville, he wanted to know where I fit into the scheme of things. So when I said, "Soy hija de Romeo Villarreal y Seguirre," and my mother did not grow up here; she grew up in Harlingen, but he knew my father, and he said, "Tu papá era poeta." Well, I didn't know that. And he told me a story that my father had written a poem in Spanish and that they had published it in the high school annual the year that they both graduated from high school in Brownsville. And that year was during the Depression. They didn't have enough money to produce the annual at the college and at the high school at the same time. So they took the names of the two newspaper or annuals, the Collegian and the Palmetto, and they produced the Palmegian that year. And my father, so I found the annual, I went back and researched it, found a copy of it, and there's my father's poem in the Palmegian for that year during the Depression.
Do you remember the poem? This is about
it's a very long poem, yes.
Okay.
Yes,
about
I've
39
got it.
maybe?
It is
1939.
It was about 39, and those were tough times. And my father, obviously, he came from Monterrey and was a legal resident alien, carried a green card until the day he died. And every time he went by the Sarita checkpoint, he'd pull out his green card. And by that time, they're waving us through. And "It's all right, sir." And Dad says, "No, I have a green card. I want you to see it." So we waited patiently until he pulled out his green card. My father played such an important role in our lives because he taught us to respect his country, Mexico, his citizenship, his language, and all that there was about that. My mother grew up in Harlingen, Texas. Her family was a pioneer family of Harlingen and signed the charter for the city of Harlingen to be established. And so she grew up bilingual, but having been an American citizen. So we got the best of both. We learned from very smart parents, but neither of them got to go to college. It was the Depression, and there wasn't enough money to go here to the junior college, and they were not mobile, took care of their families. So mother graduated as salutatorian from her high school graduating class in Harlingen, the only Latina, because I have her annual now too, and she was the only Latina in the honors program at Harlingen High School. And the story in the family gets better every time we retell it, but the story is that she was salutatorian, not valedictorian, because there was no way a Mexicana was going to be valedictorian in Harlingen, Texas at that era. So mother graduated, dad graduated, but neither could go on to college. And my father forever would say to me, you see that man over there, who is now our mayor or a physician, he would say, I made better grades than he did in geometry. De voz baja. He wasn't bragging about it. He just wanted me to know that some people had opportunities, some people didn't. And it hurts to this day to imagine wanting to go to college so badly and not being able to afford it, not being able to have it here for you, or not being mobile enough because you had other responsibilities, which is, as you know, still the case for many of our students. Mother, the same thing. Mother's older sister had gone to the University of Texas, and they had money to send her. By the time she came up, there was no money. Her younger sister went to the University of Texas. In those days, became a pharmacist. My mother was the one caught right in between and wasn't able to go. So in my home, the notion of going to college was a fait accompli. Everybody was going to go. The two brothers and myself. We didn't know what college was. We knew we were going to go and we were going to do well because our parents had not had that opportunity. So I thought of them, of course, because every time that moment was actually not about my son and daughter, my husband, my grandchildren. It was about my parents, because I believe that they're still up there kind of manipulating my fate and saying, how's this? You like this one? So I think everything that I've been able to do has been with their energy. And mine, of course, but you know, again, like you don't build a university by yourself. You don't accomplish reconocimientos like this by yourself. None of us could. And so I know that with her energy and mine together, we've been able to do things that perhaps neither one of us could have done alone.
So there's a genealogy that you speak of. And you just told partly the one of your father, Romeo, and of your mother, what was her name?
Paulita Lozano.
Paulita Lozano. But the way you tell them, though, I want to explore. Because you tell them with these intermittent stories that are quite dramatic. ¿De dónde sale eso? The understanding of the narrative form, the understanding of there's emotion and drama here in how they tell the story of my father. De voz baja lo decía. You know, and she was salutatorian. But there's a reason for it. Okay, that's a story. This is a story. This is a story. So you're doing the genealogy through these stories that you have very likely told a number of times, because that's how formative they are to you. But you just don't tell it. You don't just do the family tree. No, I'm doing the family tree, and I'm going to use very specific stories because they emote in ways that have meaning for me, but they might have meaning for you too. ¿De dónde sale eso?
It's interesting. Like all of us are searching to see who we're going to become. And in our family, you were to go into medicine. Not because my father's generation had gone into a profession. Obviously, they did not. But because they knew that my father would say, cuando se enferma alguien en la familia, vamos a hallar el dinero. So he felt like there's always going to be a job for the physician, the pharmacist, the nurse. And so you need to go into that. And remember, they'd suffered through the Depression and having left one country and starting over in another country and on and on. So I did not want to go into medicine. I mean, I had no desire. So I decided not to do that. And so then my father would say, bueno, pues, ¿qué vas a hacer? What are you going to study? And I thought speech therapist, that's as close as I get to still being a professional of the kind he wanted, but not really a physician. And I started taking some courses in that, but that didn't interest me either. What really got to me was drama, theater. And I was lousy at it, terrible, so much so that when I try out for a play in Southwest Texas State University, where I got to go first, I would end up working the lights or the sound or anything, but not on stage. I guess they clearly thought she might be good for something. Let's try her here. And one of my professors said, but you know what you're really good at? You want to try our debate squad. He said, we have a debate squad that's really hot. It's good. It's competitive. Super competitive nationwide. Why don't you come and try that? So you never know, someone's going to see a spark in you that you don't recognize. And so I started debating in college and became a competitive debater. Not because I still wanted to be on stage and be the prima donna. That wasn't meant to be. So I found another way to use skills that I had. I could research, I could think, and I had grown up with brothers. And so I had to debate them, I had to fight them, and I had to make up and get back to work and play. Our mother, what I didn't tell you was that our mother died very young. She died at the age of 40. And so I was raised after I was age 9 is how old I was. So when she died of cancer, MD Anderson hadn't even opened the year that she died. The world changed. I mean, it fell off of its axis for us. And my father, to his credit, then raised my brothers and I and spent his entire life dedicated to making sure that we were safe and fed and were in school. And he strengthened us with it. And I need to tell you this because it is probably the greatest gift my father gave us. He gave us many gifts. But he sat us down one day, and we're kids. My older brother was 11, I was 9. My younger brother was just turning 6. And he said, did you all get enough to eat today? We said, yes, Dad. And he said, and did you go to school? And you had something to wear? Yes, Dad. And we thought, poor Dad, ya se le volaron las tapas. Something's wrong. Dad's gone off the rails. And we said, yes, sir. And he said, you have survived the death of your mother. Nothing ever will happen to you again harder than what you are surviving right now. You are strong. You are resistant. You are going to become stronger in this life because nothing can knock you down. Look what you have already survived. Nothing will ever happen to you worse than this. And I remember the moment not understanding, but as I grew up myself and realized what we had gone through, he gave us a strength. He didn't say, ven, mijita, déjame cuidarte. He knew he couldn't. There were no guarantees, and he knew it clearly. And so his job was then to toughen us up and make sure that we pushed us out of the nest carefully, but always testing, always. And I would ask him later on as an adult, why did you let us do the things you did? And he would send my brother and I off to Germany for 2 weeks during Christmas break, with $100 in our pocket each. And he said, see you for Christmas. And I was like, okay. But he wanted us to test the edges of our experiences. And and if we fell, he was there to catch us. He knew he wouldn't be there forever. But while he was here, his job was to toughen us up. So I tell you that because how lucky I was to have a mother like we had, and then to have this father who so clearly was able to take what he was left with and then create a family, and then strengthen us up. He never made us feel like we were orphans. I never felt orphaned. I could have, should have, perhaps, but I felt like I was Romeo's daughter, you know, and I'm Julieta, so that was in itself a connection. But it was, I mean, we could do anything. We're tough. I needed that. In my career, I needed to be able to deal with men. I'd grown up with boys. I debated, by the way, in men's division because in those days, if you were a mixed team, male-female, you had to debate in the men's division. Who knew? But that's how it was. So I debated men. Well, both of those things, growing up with boys, learning how to play rough and make up and play again, debating men, and knowing when they were bluffing, and I could tell after a while I was not tough, and that all prepared me for going to the legislature, or going to D.C., or going to New York, or raising money, or moving the needle forward. So those things that can break you when you're growing up, or could break you, can also serve the opposite purpose. They can strengthen you. And so I never felt, I tell you the story of my mother dying, but not because I wanted for you to feel sorry for us, but because it was real, and it was tough, and you still get teary-eyed thinking about it, but not because it broke the family, because we learned from my father how to use it as a strength for me.
What was your mother like?
She was beautiful. And my brother is beautiful, and I was not. It was like, and I'd say, tell my father, I want to look like mother. And he'd say, honey, your mother was beautiful. And then he would pause. He'd say, but you got your mother's brain. I said, I don't want her brain. I wanted her to look like her. He said, you look like me. And I said, I don't want to look like an old man that's bald. But anyway, so once we got through that, he said, but you've got her brain. And mother was brilliant. And so thank you, Lord, because I got the good stuff. And of course, my father was very smart too. So mother was tough. She was muy religiosa. She was Mexican Presbyterian, and we went to the Mexican Presbyterian Church in Brownsville every Sunday. You had to die before you were excused from going to church. We learned the Bible. When the parents would go to their service, all the children would march out and go to our level of understanding class and learn the Bible. So I know every character in the Bible, and it was all in Spanish. And so we had a wonderful experience growing up and in a religious environment. My father was Católico, and he went to church at least once a year for Christmas or New Year's or whatever it was. But they didn't want to, they shared everything in life. My father said the only thing that they never shared was their religion. Neither wanted to convert. So we were baptized secretly to the other church in both churches. So we had a Catholic godparents and Presbyterian godparents, unbeknownst to anybody. And so here was interesting. We had Mexican citizenship because we were children of Mexican citizen, my father. So my mother was an American citizen, so we had American citizenship. So we had dual citizenship until we would be 18, and then you had to decide which way you wanted to go. And then we had the two religions. And so I thought everybody was like that. I thought, isn't this interesting and lovely? You get to learn both ways of thinking. And so I ended up deciding I went a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and kind of created our own hybrid of who we were to be. So it was rich.
So after the age of 9, when your mother passed, did you speak to your mother after that? Do you still speak to your mother? And what, if you did, what were those conversations like?
I don't speak to her, but I call on her and I feel her. So you know that when you're in the midst of working on your doctorate or doing the next stage of your preparation, for me it was at UT Austin. I was in married student housing. We had no money. I had 2 babies, literally 3 years old and 4 years old. And I would not see them until late at night sometimes, and you know all the guilt that comes with that, and my husband trying to work and then help me with the babies, and me getting beat up at the doctoral courses and all of the things that occur. And I remember leaving campus late one evening after a late class and coming down. I can tell you exactly where it was as you leave MLK Street to go down to Lamar to get to married student housing. And I was spent. I was done. And I had been humiliated in the classroom by a professor, and I didn't deserve it, and I knew it, and I knew I was smart, and he shouldn't have done it. And I thought, why am I here? What are you doing? Putting your family through all of this. You're away from your father. You're not taking care of your father. You're not taking care of your children. Your husband hasn't seen an iron shirt in 3 years. It all loads up. And so I'm coming down the hill, and I am spent, no energy left. And all of a sudden, I got this massive amount of will and energy. And I thought, ¿de dónde viene? I don't understand. But it was powerful. And by the time I got home, I was angry at the professor, but I was not going to go home. I was not going to quit. I was not upset anymore. I could handle it. And not right away. I remember telling my husband the story of the professor beating me up in class, literally, figuratively, but I told my husband, crying, I'm sure, by this time. He said I was spewing like a volcano. And he said, my husband is very wise, and he said, then maybe he's right. And I said, excuse me? I wanted the White Knight to come in and go and charge into the castle and get this guy. And my husband said, maybe he's right. Maybe you weren't meant to get your doctorate. Because if you're going to let one man decide your destiny, maybe he was right. And it just took all the air out of me. So having my mother's strength to fight and to make it up when you've been knocked down, and to believe that you were meant to do something. Mother always said you were given these gifts because God wants you to do something with them, not for you necessarily, but for the world. That was very clear to her. I won a spelling bee in 5th grade, and I spelled Mediterranean correctly. And Mother said, ay, te dieron un don. ¿Has recibido un don? I said, no, Mom, it was Mediterranean. It was a word. She said, no, honey, you've been given a gift. You better start figuring out how you're going to use it. So I connect with
By the way,
Mother?
this was during her last year of life.
Of life, yeah.
So she was probably attempting to be prophetic as much as she was mothering all
She
at the
must
same
have.
time.
She must have. She was ill for 5 years. So, and went through horrendous 5 years of experimentation because they didn't know what to do yet for people like her with that illness. And so who knows what she must have been going through. It had to be what you just described because she knew she was leaving. We didn't. Never imagined.
No quería que ustedes vieran que sufría.
Oh no. Her, sometimes when you get chemo, you lose your hair or your hair discolors. And so she ended up losing color. She had beautiful black hair. And my father would dye her hair at night so that the people couldn't see that she was losing the color, the pigmentation. Her arm would get swollen, and it also was splotchy with lack of color. And so we saw the signs of something going on with her, but
I'm guessing you've been to the Mediterranean?
I have.
Did you think about fifth grade when you went?
You know, no, no, I wasn't thinking about that. I was, actually, I was there with the Ford Foundation and doing some work for them, and went to of course, went to the pyramids and went to Egypt also, and went to Israel, and went to the largest library in the world in Alexandria. And I know that my mother would have loved to have been there. So when I think of Mother, I think of her at my side, and I really believe that I could not have done what I've been able to do without her, and maybe she couldn't have done it by herself either. But together, there is a tremendous amount of strength and will.
So you went there as a board member of the Ford Foundation? Mm-hmm. When were you a board member of the Ford Foundation?
Okay, so that's kind of an interesting story, because I was a Ford Fellow first, and I was teaching at the time. I had a job at Texas Southmost College. I was doing what I was supposed to do. I got my master's degree, and I was teaching speech communication. And that was fine. We had a little house. We were back home in the valley. I was taking care of my father. My brothers had left. So, I went away, came back, and had these two beautiful babies and a husband and a little house. And so I should have been satisfied, done. And I got a little bored. And I told my husband one day, I got to go back to school. And he said, we just came back. And I said, I know, sweetheart, but... And he says, we don't have any money. I said, I know. And I said, but I found out that you can apply for a Ford Foundation fellowship. And I'd like to apply. And he says, well, go ahead, try it. So I did. I didn't know what it was, how to do it. But magically, I got into the finalist. And then I was sent to, or invited to go to San Francisco and get interviewed. And I did. And then lo and behold, I made it through a Spanish language interview. 3 older Latinos were the interviewers. And I figured that all of us were smart. All of us had master's degrees that were being interviewed. And I think they were trying to figure out who the real Mexicans were, who the real Latinos were in the group. At any rate, so I got it. And that was like, a gift from the gods, because it paid for my tuition at UT Austin. It paid for living expenses. And so I was making as much money, imagine, as a Ford Fellow as I would have been as a faculty member. So I was covered. I thought, that's good. Okay, now, son, husband, you find your job. And he did. And then we got into married student housing. So I had been a Ford Fellow, and I had been a great recipient of tremendous support from that money. I also was a teaching assistant, so I even made a little more money but we were in married student housing, which was where the poor people lived, right? But my husband called us the high rollers of the low rent district. I said, what does that mean? He said, well, we're all poor, but we're in the newest apartment. So because my son had asthma and he didn't want to put us in an apartment that was old. So these are brand new. We paid $114 a month.
Wow. For
rent, utilities included. You don't forget things. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I did my doctorate with Ford money, and it was a gift. It was wonderful. And I knew it was a gift, and it was very rare. And I had told Ford I was going to use it to come home. So when and try to do something for my community. And I think that's really the reason that I ended up as one of the recipients, because Ford is very much into making sure you better your own community. I didn't say I wanted to go to Harvard and become a tenured professor. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That was not the intent. It was spread the word, spread the gifts. So of course, I did all that I did. And then one day I get a phone call from Ford.
This is years later. This is
Much here.
10, 15 years later.
It was, yes, I was
You were-
already a president.
You were president of
Texas Southmost
of
College.
Texas Southmost.
We were raising money, and we were changing the world in our case, trying to build a university on top of the community college. And I get a call from Susan Beresford, who was the president of Ford. I had never met her before. And she wanted me to go to New York City, where their headquarters are, to tell the story of what we were doing, why it was so important that something happened big in the valley, and what we thought the impact might be if we were successful. So I go, of course, prepped to tell a story, and there was just like 5 people there around a lunch table. And I'm used to having large audiences, right? 5,000 people in a conference, or at least 20 or 30. I had 5. So I told my story the way I do, and then they thanked me, and I was dismissed. So I flew home, and I didn't know why I had gone really. But you don't turn down an invitation from a big foundation, one of the biggest in the nation. So sure enough, about 3 months later, I get a phone call from Susan, and she's invited. She said, the board has considered your name, and we would like you to serve on our board. She did not know I had been a Ford Fellow. That had been before her time, and they did not keep really good records. And I tried to explain it to her, and she said, that's not why you were invited. I said, well, okay, but isn't that interesting?
But it really was, because it allowed you to go get a P.H.D, which allowed you to be in a position. So in this strange kind of subtle way, and maybe not so subtle. I mean, there's a through line here. So you were being interviewed by these 5 people.
That's why it was just 5 people at a lunch table.
Yeah.
But I spent 2 terms, so it was a total of 12 years on that board. And
that's a good gig, right? Because that's a paid board.
It is a paid board, but they also match your gift giving by times 4.
Oh, wow.
Which was a huge gift. And then I traveled the world. I went, and my father worked for Pan American Airways. So that's why I got to go to Germany when I was young.
What did your father do with Pan American Airways?
He started out as a janitor and ended up as a broker. So he was brokering. Pan American Airways had a large operation in Brownsville because the jets of those days had to refuel, Pan Am jets, refuel at the southernmost tip of the United States before traveling into Latin America. So they had set up a shop here in Brownsville. And so Dad worked there for lifelong, more than 46 years. But began as a janitor. He says that I was emptying the wastebaskets of the girls that I had made better grades than in, he always made sure I knew he was smart. I mean, but he no era presumido para nada. But he was not, he wasn't arrogant, but he was confident. So he said, I needed a job. Everybody needed a job. And at any rate, he ended up being the boss of his group. And then he was brokering goods for engines, jet engines, and things that I didn't realize, airlines negotiate and trade off parts. And he was with Compañía Mexicana de Aviación in Mexico and Pan American Airways here. And he was using his dual citizenship to be able to sign on both sides of the river. And he was very proud of that. He said, that's why you're worth 2 people if you know 2 languages. And if you know 3 languages, you're worth 3 people. And so, I mean, we that was not a lesson missed on us. So, at any rate.
I mean, I think your father is almost like encapsulated what you would later do in higher education with creating the bilingual, bicultural, biliterate piece of work at UT Brownsville that would then carry over to UTRGV. Wow. So I'm curious about a number of different things here. Like, is it worth talking about the 3 people who interviewed you in Spanish? And is it worth talking about the 5 people who interviewed you at Ford? And was there one of those guys from the 3, was one of the 5? No, so Tomás was not there anywhere. Although you may have shared with Tomás
or Arturo Madrid.
Or Arturo Madrid?
No, he was not there either. It was all, I don't remember the three guys from California.
Okay.
But, and I don't remember all of the ones at Ford in New York, except for Susan.
How old were you when you became president of Texas Southmost?
37.
37?
Yes. I know. Oh, no. What you don't know is that, our resumes are full of all the things we've done. We leave off all the things that didn't work out. Those times we applied and nobody called us back, and tried to get into a program, got rejected, or tried for a scholarship, didn't get it. You're hearing about the things that I got. I applied for the presidency before I was 28 years old. 28. Oh, yes. Well, 37, big deal. 28 was a big deal. I had come back from UT Austin. I was a big shot, I thought.
You had defended.
I had my doctorate by 28. I had the 2 babies. We wanted them to start in first grade here, so I was in a rush to get to Austin, finish the doctorate, come back home, have them start first grade, and that worked. My son started first grade in September. We came back in July, and so everything according to Hoyle, right? But once I got back, they assigned me to teach the same things I was teaching before I left. And I said, you don't understand. I'm brilliant now. I have a doctorate from UT Austin. You know how many Latinas in the United States? It was less than 1% of the doctorates the year I graduated in 76 were going to Latinas in the country. So, I was a commodity, and I knew it, but we didn't know it here. And so I was assigned the same classes as when I had left. And I thought, I have made a huge mistake coming home. And I came home for my father, for my family, but not for my career. That was suicidal in many ways. And my professors were telling me from UT, we can put you here and we can put you here. And they look better if they put their students in good places. And they didn't want me to come. Where? To Texas Southmost College. So I thought they were right. And I made a huge mistake. It was a very hard year for me of transition home. I thought I had not made the right decision. And then I got angry because things weren't working right at the college. And I kept thinking, I could fix that. Or paychecks weren't coming out on time. It's like, are you kidding? We can't run a business office. How can we do everything else we want to do? And I kept getting a little bit more annoyed. And I was one of those, you lo conoces, you understand the type, recalcitrant, vocal, bit radical faculty member who wants to fix things and recognizes that things aren't working well. So anyway, the presidency came up, and I decided I was going to apply. And I went home and told my husband, and I said, now, here's the thing. I'm not going to get it. They're going to laugh. And it's okay. But I need to signal that I want to do more. And this is the only way I can do it. And I don't have time to wait until I'm 10 more years or whatever. So, and I said, and people are going to make fun of you and me in our little town because you know everybody. And they're going to say, ¿Quién se cree esta? And I mean, the faculty, as I'd walk down the hall, I knew they were going, hey, mira, who the heck does she think she is? But anyway, so I applied. Well,
but that may not be rhetorical, right? Because really, think about it. Like, what's the answer? ¿Quién se cree? Who really did you think you were?
I don't know. I just knew that I was smart.
And that you could fix things.
And that I could fix things.
You thought that you could do something.
Yeah, it was.
That's who you were.
I guess.
Because ¿quién se cree? Cree que es alguien que puede componer.
Anyway, so here's what happened. Again, the unexpected. I got into the finalist. Why? Because they wanted a woman in the group so they could pretend that, this is my interpretation, that they were being equitable. And so here now I am actually being interviewed, and I study. Because what do you do as a student? You study, right? So I no internet, but I got everything I could find on how colleges are funded and where the appropriations come and how those appropriations can grow or not. And I tried to learn everything I could in a week before I went in for the interview. I went into the interview, and I was interviewed by 4 college trustees. One was a surgeon, one was a grocer, one was an attorney. And they were all older men, and they were all, not all Latino. 2 were Latino, 2 were not. And one of them says, okay, here's your situation. And he says, you have to go to a meeting out of town, and you have to go with a man. Do you go on the same plane? And when you get there, do you stay in the same hotel? And I thought, I went away to school for 3 more years. My children didn't see me all day long, and you're going to insult me with a question? But I thought, okay, don't kick him in the stomach just yet. And so I said, sir, I'm a member of many male-dominated organizations. Most of them are male-dominated. Well, no, all of them are male-dominated, and I've never had a problem, nor do I expect to now. One of the other trustees says, next question. The next question was another one. I got a question. And he says, how old are you? He thought that was like going to be the real zinger. And before I could answer, the other gentleman said, she has her birth date on the resume. Those were the old days. You can add and subtract and figure that out. They were going to humiliate me for being too young. So it was a terrible interview. I felt, when women say they were abused in, figuratively, that's what it felt like. It was like I was humiliated by these guys that were trying to make me feel somehow bad because I was who I was or how young I was. But I got over it. And the president that was named, to his credit, I think he thought she's going to give me trouble, so I better give her something to do. So he named me. He asked if I would take a job as the director of the self-study for reaffirmation of accreditation. Nobody wants that job. And I didn't know what it meant. Literally. And he says, you think you can handle it? And I said, of course. And he said, then it's yours. So for the next 3 years, I learned everything there was to learn about that college. I knew more than just about anyone else. Because I knew how many books there were in the library by discipline. I knew how many vehicles we owned and what the gas consumption was. I knew the funding streams. I knew where the problems really lay.
It was a perfect
deep.
job.
Oh my gosh. It was throw me in the briar patch. It was, and I loved it. I was a student again, but now not of theory, but of how do we compare against the criteria of Southern Association. So when I finished, they asked me if I would serve as academic dean. I did that for 5 years. And then the presidency came up again. And this time I was ready.
So what happened to the other guy? The one who got the presidency and named you?
He had some health problems and left. And there was a bit of a turmoil and, things changed. And
So the second time you applied, you were 37. And at that point, you made the final, like the final 2 maybe.
There were 70-some applicants, and 4 of us were interviewed.
What was the interview process then?
They didn't want to give me the upper advantage, the upper hand, because they knew me and I was a dean, and so they decided to do everything by phone. It wasn't Zoom, but it was by phone, conference call. And so all of us were interviewed first by conference call, and then that was winnowed down to 2, and I was one of the 2, and then I was interviewed in person by trustees.
Wow. There's a photograph of you and Eddie Lucio and Rene Oliveira and Governor Ann Richards. What was the occasion? Was that when
UT Brownsville was established?
UT Brownsville was established. So take us to that story. And maybe you can talk. So there you are, right? And so there you've got to be maybe 40, 41 years old.
There was 5 years later. Yes, so I was about 41. You're right. Exactly. And why I wore white on white, I don't know, but that's what came out of my closet that day. And
you may have wanted to match the governor's hair.
I guess. Certainly not. Yes. But you see how young Rene was, and Eddie, And Homer Pena was the president at the time of Pan Am Brownsville, and had been for about 12 years. And so I was the baby.
Yeah, how was that moment for you?
Well, it was extraordinary because we had decided to court UT. I mean, who were we to court UT? But I had two women on our board, Mary Rose Cardenas and Jean Eckhoff, and they were gutsy. And they didn't know how to take no for an answer. So I was taught to have courage by these women. They were courageous. That said, as I say it today, they helped me by lending me their courage until I grew my own. I watched them, and I watched Mary talk to chancellors who were physicists, Hans Mark, or Mark Udoff, constitutional lawyer, or Bill Cunningham, dean of the School of Business. It didn't, to her, your credentials meant nothing. She had something that she wanted to say, and she didn't want anything for herself. She wanted it for the people of the community. She was unapologetic, and you needed to help her. And I learned from her that you can do that and not get shot full of holes. You can do that, and it gives you more strength. Because next time Mary Rose would call on them, they'd say, "Yes, ma'am, what do you need?" And I got to know Irma Rangel by that time, who was the first Hispanic woman in the state legislature in Texas. Brilliant, but could cuss like a sailor, and held her own. And I learned from Irma as well. Of course, Ann Richards. Ann Richards and I became colleagues in the strangest way, because she liked us. She liked what we were doing, and I called her one night, and she answered. I mean, it was that kind of a thing. Who would call the governor? Well, I did, and she answered, and she'd say, "Julie, Ann, what do you want, honey?" And I'd say, "Well, Governor, thank you for answering." And I'd tell her what it was. She goes, "Is that all, honey? I can do that. Ask me for something hard."
What did you ask for?
Well, we were trying to get our first building, and we got it.
Oh.
And so it was $22 million, and I wanted to make sure I was on that list.
So this is to become when
UT
you had
Brownsville.
become UT Brownsville, and so those 22 million was what built that beautiful front.
It was the Science and Engineering Technology building. It was the first big boy building, as they say. It's on the TSC campus now, on the edge of the campus.
Yes.
But it was all our science labs, and I was going to do physics. I'm going to do engineering, so I needed science, real science labs. And but that picture was when Anne came to sign that we were established as a university. We had become an autonomous university. I wanted to break away from Pan American, because we were just affiliated with them. We were Pan Am at Brownsville. Well, they were getting Solvidas. We were getting their Solvidas. Well, we were never going to make it to big time if that was the pecking order. So we had said we'll only do this if we can form an autonomous component in the UT system. And that meant forming UT Brownsville. So we became the 15th university in the UT system. No small task.
But not permanent university fund
But
eligible.
no puff. That's a whole other story, and a very powerful one. And the reason, in many ways, that we now are UT RGV was because we had an opportunity. The window cracked open. We had a courageous and brilliant chancellor, Francisco Figueroa.
And there's a photograph of you and Francisco Figueroa.
Wow. I mean,
Yes, right there.
There you go. There's my buddy. He says we're brothers, sisters. Francisco, I had been on his search committee when he became president of the medical school. And so then he became my colleague as a president. And then he became our chancellor. And I had been harassing folks for a long time, saying we're the only ones that are not in puff. Pan Am in Brownsville, and it no es justo. It's wrong. And how can you call us part of the UT system and not treat us equally? And yet, when you put us up on the metrics, you compared our students with everybody from every other school. And I said, we run a race, and you give them, fancy tennis shoes, and we're descalzos. We're barefoot.
And so PUF is that huge endowment that the University of Texas system
Clement
has.
University Fund is an endowment that feeds from their revenues that are generated West Texas oil lands, 2 million acres, that feeds UT Austin, UT system schools, and A&M schools. The first Aggie joke to be invented was that, because of that total distribution, UT schools get 2/3, A&M gets 1/3. So I love telling that because I'm sorry, but I'm.
We have a number of Aggies on our board.
Excuse me, but I didn't do it. But you know, ni modo. But here's okay. So the ironies go on and on, because eventually the state of Texas said, well, that doesn't seem right. Other schools need money too. So they formed the Higher Education Achievement Fund, HEAF. So they put all of us in the HEAF. But if think of a trough that's this size and all the cattle trying to get money from there, another trough, puff, that's this size, and just a few. So everybody was always trying to get into puff, get out of HEAF. And they had told us many reasons why we couldn't do it. And I had fought with every chancellor. I mean, and I had 7 of them, which is survival in its best form anyway. But now it was Francisco there.
A friendly one.
A friendly, and he understood.
Because
he had
was
heard
from the
me.
border.
And from Laredo, and he got it. He knew it, and he had felt it, and he had lived it. And he had to compete, too, as the president of a medical school with Southwestern and UTMB and Houston. And he knew money was going elsewhere and not for him, even though he was getting puff money, but other contributions. So when he became chancellor, he called me in one day and he says, and why haven't you harassed me about this? And I said, because I knew you'd get to it. He said, I got to it. And he said, try this.
That's a moment. Is that like 2014? 13. Wow. So you're one of the people responsible for almost $1 billion coming to the Valley for higher ed in the last 10 years.
I am one of many.
Cigarroa,
Yes.
obviously, El Doctor Cigarroa, and other people,
the chairman of our board.
From Westlaco.
From Westlaco. When was that going to happen again?
Right. The stars aligned. And Pedro Reyes being from
Pedro
FAR,
Reyes, also
all kinds of
executive
things.
vice chancellor for academic affairs. So, I mean, everybody was in place. It was a moment of, and I think that's something that you learn from so much of this is, there are moments when I was ready to fall on the sword for other things. And I remember getting a call from a friend at the UT system, and they knew I was, fighting on an issue. And they said, don't do it. Don't fall on the sword for this issue. And I said, yes, but it's wrong and we shouldn't be treated this way. And she says, Juliet, you're going to take them on and they're going to win. And you know what happens when you throw a stone in the ocean? It makes a little splash, and then no one ever knows it was ever there. And that's going to happen to you. We need you in your position to carry forward. And if you don't do that, you're not going to get replaced by someone like you, in all likelihood. Just think about it. I mean, they wouldn't tell me what to do, but they'd say, just think about it. And so there were many moments when I knew there was another battle to be taken on. And like David and Goliath, we always had our Goliaths. And there are some battles that were not as important as the big one. And Puff was the big one. So when Francisco said, and I had spent 22 years trying to get into Puff and nothing. So when Francisco said, you think we can do it now, but here's what we'd have to do.
We have to abolish you.
I couldn't even say the word. Se me atrancaba. I mean, literally. I have words. And it just wouldn't come out. I couldn't say it. And he'd look at me because there would be a pause. And he'd say, come on, And because to imagine that you were going to abolish something you had helped build. So it was hard. But okay, swallow and get over it. Because look what the end result was. And I knew that. I knew that I would be gone. Francisco would be gone someday. Robert Nelson would be gone. It didn't matter. Gene Powell would be gone. And all of us are gone. Right? We're doing other things. But that moment of alignment was very special, and it was going to crack that window open, and only for a minute. There's a wonderful song in Hamilton. There are many wonderful songs in Hamilton. But there's one where he says, I took my shot.
Mm.
And I tell Francisco, you took your shot. Because if Francisco had said, no, not going to do it, couldn't have done it.
Right.
If Jean had said no, if any one of us, if I could have, started raising all kinds of crazy things, you would splinter off one by one, and it would not. We had to, because it was still a hard road. We had to convince the Valley legislators and the people that were our donors and the faculty and the staff, all our, my authorizing environment in the Valley. Then we had to go to the regents. No easy task. You're going to do what? Where? Why? Then we had to go to the legislature. And finally we got a unanimous vote of the regents. Then we got a unanimous vote in the House. And we did all but one unanimous vote in the Senate. And so.
Well, that's, the word transformative has become cliche-ish. But that piece of work, that one shot, did transform the region. And just in less than a decade, we have seen this. All over the Valley. The Upper Valley is like sprawling with the medical, industry now. Mm-hmm. And so there's so much more wealth being generated, which then, of course, impacts everything else. So, good work.
You're excused for making the mistakes.
I think what we're gonna do now, Julieta, is we're gonna pause for a minute, see if we can just kind of like recompose, and then get into what I think is very prominent in just about every one of your stories, is the issue of gender. You told this one story about how I think they selected me as one of the finalists because they needed to have it. Well, if you think about that time in the 70s when they did include you, the height of the feminist movement, mm-hmm. of the equal rights movement, mm-hmm. now being super loud. Mm-hmm. So if you look at that time, they better have done that, right? Maybe now, because the environment is different, maybe they can. No, but now, I think that time it set the precedent mm-hmm. for now you better. But now you don't need the loud voices because it's so much more, I think, integrated into the culture of decision making at the highest levels. So we'll talk about what this month means, through your perspective when we come back. Okay, Tony, so we're going to take a little break. Maybe about a minute or so, and then we'll return with our museum Pláticas. Stay with us.
Under the executive order of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, all persons can sell their gold below market value to the government.
Enterré oro bajo de la casa. Úsalo para cuidar a tu hermano.
I found gold.
That's my gold.
That's my father's gold. The jury finds the true owner to be...
It's a story filled with mystery, intrigue, and one's birthright. Dr. Garcia's gold exhibit is on display at the Museum of South Texas History. Go to mosthistory.org for more information.
Welcome back to Museum Pláticas. Francisco Guajardo here with the Museum of South Texas History. So I'm trying to make sense of the last hour of the plática that we had, because we went. It was not a conventional oral history.
No.
It was much more of a plática.
Yes.
As is kind of the signature of this program. But you took us, to your parents. You took us to you as a child in a very poignant moment of transition when your mother passed when you were 9 years old. Hard to imagine, how then your father would have marshaled the strength of parenting and nurtured, children in ways where you would have, come out with this sense of self and sense of belonging in this world is very complex. And so I think you mentioned in the plática how male dominated, male controlled, male this and male that. And you've punctured through every one of those. I think you explained why. I think, it was implicit in a number of ways. But be explicit now. How is it that Julieta Garcia happens? Julieta Villarreal and Julieta Villarreal Garcia. How is it that it happens? And now how can it happen more and more in a world where we search for equity and search for fairness? Begin to unpack that, like the patriarchy and how you've been able to navigate the patriarchy in ways where you've had opportunities to be in positions of influence and decision making.
Ironically, because Mother, I don't know that this is the correct answer, but it's a stab at it, because Mother's absence then created a terrific pressure on my father to do it all. So imagine, right? It's not just enough to be the father, but now he had to try and fill everybody's needs. And so my mother could sew, and she had a sewing machine. So I remember my father opening up the sewing machine and sitting down at the sewing machine after Mother had died. And he called on me. He said, "Come over here." And I went over, and he said, "How do you thread the machine?" And I looked at him, and I said, "Well, I don't know. I used to watch Mom." He said, "Well, you watched your mother." And I was like, "Well, yes, but..." And he said, "Okay, let's figure it out." So we figured out how to thread the machine, and he sewed something that needed to be mended. That night, I remember, and maybe it's as an adult now that it's much more poignant than it was that night, our world changed. There were no girl jobs. There were no guy jobs or boy jobs. I did get assigned to do the dishes. My brothers did do the lawn or wash the cars. So there were jobs in that regard, but we were all trying to survive it. So when something needed to be done, we all got in to do it, whether it was sewing or cooking. My father was just a good cook, and he would sit there at night. We'd watch television or do our homework, and Dad's making flour tortillas for the next day, or making a big guisado and putting them in like TV dinner containers, wrapping them up with a masking tape on and labeling them, guisado de puerco or whatever it was, so that we would have food when he wasn't around. We could just zap it or do something with it. And so he, I think, taught us that there was no gender in jobs. When I got married, then, of course, then you have to divide up the duties at a home, right? So their job would surface, and I'd say, "Oh, that's the daddy's job." And so my husband would dutifully then go and perform it. And then another job would come up, and I said, "That's a daddy's job." And he finally, after the 10th job I assigned to him, and I had no jobs, he said, "What does a mommy do in this relationship?" And I said, "Oh, must have been I had a different model." So I think I was, wonderfully lucky in the sense that there was no gender bias toward work work needed to be done. Whoever happened to be there got to do it. So I played, cowboys and Indians with my brothers, and I was often the Indian getting tied up to the palm tree. But I played with them. And so whether it was play or work and expectations, that was, I guess, the other thing. We were all going to excel, Dad said. It didn't matter your gender. It never came up. What are you going to be, and how are you going to get there? And there was no excuse. You were just going to achieve. And when my dad would get together with his brothers for a wedding or a funeral, it was always, give me something to brag about. And that did not mean a new dress or something added to the house. It was, what have you achieved? Because the Güero's son got into medical school, and Rodolfo's son got in a scholarship to Trinity. And you, honey? And so you had to have something to give your father as bragging rights. So we saw how to compete in our family, not with what car you drove or what house you had or didn't, but in how the children were achieving in school. That was where we could sobresalir. We couldn't do the other things. We couldn't get the bigger car, couldn't do those, but we could study hard and do well. So I think, interestingly enough, growing up in that kind of an environment where gender, now I had to come in earlier at night than the boys did. So there were some, rules that were gender-based, but nothing that was harmful at all. I got to travel like the boys did, and vice versa. It never would have occurred to us not to do that. And my father bought a boat. And so here was the other part, the fun part, because he converted, the boat was because he was a fisherman before Mother died. And then he decided he was going to get a boat. He was going to learn how to water ski, and he was going to teach us all how to water ski, because both kids, boys and girls could do that together. So we became a water ski family in the Resaca by the college that I was to lead eventually. And people would drive in the afternoon to go and see the Villarreales skiing. And we grew up almost every afternoon. We would drive from our house downtown Brownsville, take our little boat down Main Street sometimes, us in the boat, pretending to be driving downtown. Can you imagine? And we would spend our afternoons at the Resaca water skiing.
Well,
so there was a constant stretching of the norms for us, doing things that were extraordinary for one salary family. I still marvel that we could do so much with what he was making.
And so the stretching of the norms included the gender norms.
Yes, absolutely.
Was that I shouldn't ask, but I'm still going to ask you. I was going to ask, was that a bit of a shock to your husband that, oh my God, my norms around gender are so different from your norms?
Where are the mommy jobs? My husband was my brother's best friend. That's how things happen. And he was older and went off to Vietnam, came back. He was a medic. And I was still very young. And he said, when he found out how young I was, he left and came back 4 years later. But he was attracted somehow. And he said, I'm home now. We should get married. And I said, I've got to go to school. And he was so angry at me. And he said, but I've just come home. I mean, he'd been in war. And I said, I know, but I got to go to school. So I went to San Marcos, even though he had just come back. And I left in September. By Thanksgiving, I was engaged. So
you married when you were like 19
I was
or 20?
19, 18 engaged, 19 married. I had skipped first grade, so I was already ahead a year. So I had my son the day after my 21st birthday, and my daughter the next year at 22. I was pregnant the whole time. I was at U of H. I did everything wrong. I married too young. I had babies while in school. We had no money. But my husband said this to me when I was finishing the bachelor's, and we were in Houston, and he said, we're already poor. We're already here. He said, ya es muy fácil. Why don't you just go ahead and get a master's degree? And I said, well, it's not so fácil, but he says, I know, but you can do it. And why don't why don't you try it? So I applied and got in. But it was never like, I'm going to get a doctorate. It never occurred to me so my husband actually sees more in my potential very often, especially in those early years, than I did. I hesitated to apply for a job, and he'd say, you see that guy over there? What does he have that you don't have? He maybe coached and you didn't, because that's how people got administrative jobs. He said, but nomás eso, te falta. But otherwise, you could run circles around it.
So your husband, in some ways, maybe saw, like your mother saw in you, both prophetic in some ways. They saw qualities that were unique,
No question,
and special in
no
you.
question. And could I have done this without that at home? The answer is no. I just could not have. Something would have been damaged along the way. The marriage, the children, my own confidence to try, because remember, I was sued by the Department of Homeland Security at one point for not letting them.
There's a photograph that you forwarded of you in front of the border wall.
Okay,
So you're telling that story right now, are you?
yes.
Yeah.
I
So
can have.
Pam, if you can just put that. So right there, that's quite a photograph.
Yes.
Oh my God. So tell that story.
Well, the short version, I got a letter from the Department of Homeland Security. They wanted me to sign permission to let them come on our campus and begin to build a wall. And by the way, they could come all the way deep into the campus. We had 7 construction projects ongoing at the time they were doing this. Our momentum was fast, and we were moving, and then all of a sudden they wanted to lop off 120 acres on the south side of the levee where we had a golf course and a golf team. They wanted to build an 18-foot high fence. That's the ugly fence that you see behind us with picos at the top. They wanted to, and by the way, if they cut down a tree, the trees that we had just planted, that they were not to be held responsible. I mean, and on and on and on. And I called up Mark Udoff, who was our chancellor at the time, and he was the constitutional law attorney. And I said, Mark, I'm not gonna sign permission, and I'm gonna get sued by the federal government. And he says, no, Julia. He said, tell me what's going on. So I explained to him, and I said, but Mark, there's more. You're gonna get sued too, because they're gonna sue the whole UT system. And you don't call your boss and say, Dad, can I get sued? And he said, tell me what's going on. So I did. So that was one of those. We had to convince the regents that this was a fight they should take on. Once we did, then we had to, Kay Bailey Hutchinson, our senator. We needed lots of help to make this one work. And I had my husband and I sat our children down at the kitchen table one night, because when something happens to you, it happens to the whole family, right? And I said, they're going to build a dossier on your mother, your father. And I explained what that meant. And I said, and they're going to try to find some way to discredit me. Dad, your father and I know what we've done. They're not going to be able to find anything that we know of. But I don't know what you've done. And I looked at my son, who was a teenager by this time, and my daughter, who was a teenager. And they just were looking at me with these wide, and I said, so if there's something we should know right now, we tell us, because no one said a word. So I don't know, they just toughed it out. But the point was, it was a terrible undertaking, hard as it was, on the whole family, controversial in the community. Some people didn't want you to do that, thought, you were not being patriotic. And I knew that if we taught people at a university to speak their minds and to do what their beliefs lead them to believe is right. And I was building at the university a generation to sustain our democracy, people that would vote and volunteer and get involved and defend our country, our democracy. And now the very people that are being asked to and our bilingual, bicultural community that we were building, and now we're getting asked to put up an 18-foot high fence to keep people out. It was the antithesis of everything we had stood for. The historical nature of our campus that we had built a campus to emulate and grow the environmental issues of migration for everything that's on the wrong side of the wall. I mean, there was on every level, you could argue it on land seizure and who are you to take my land in the United States? I mean, my gun, but my land. So, I mean, there was so many egregious issues that I faced at that moment. So I had no choice but to do that. What was beautiful about it was that when I went to federal court, I mean, and going into federal court's not a fun thing. I had a front row of local attorneys pro bono that were respaldo. And they would call me at my office during the day, late after their work was done, and they'd say, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, working on the fence case." And they'd say, "We're coming over." And one by one, they would come over and help us think and strategize. And I learned Eduardo Rodriguez was one of them. And that's where he and I we had worked on development, raising money together, but now this was fighting for what I felt was the soul of the university. We went to federal court.
And he had gone to UT Law himself.
And he had gone to UT Law. I mean, you know, so it was just counter to everything. It was wrong. And here was my sense. I had no choice. I couldn't not. I mean, there was no way I could sign and still hold my head up and tell people we're building a university that believes in truth will set you free and all the things that we say. And the Friday before we were going to go to federal court on Monday, the 31st of July. And I was alone in my office, and I don't do well alone. So I called up the president of the faculty senate, and I said, "Please convene your faculty this afternoon." And it's like, on a Friday afternoon, really? Are you kidding? And I said, "Yeah, I need to talk to them." He did, and we convened. And I just said, "Look, we're going to go to court Monday, and I don't know what's going to come down. I don't know if we're going to win it or lose it. But I want you to know that I think we did the right thing. I think it was a principled position to take. And I'm very proud of the people that joined us in this work. And I just wanted you to know that whatever happens Monday, I believe the university did the right thing." I got the most beautiful notes from people that would never have written me a note and saying, "I've never been more proud to be here at this university than I am today." We got lucky. And the judge worked out a deal so that I could design the fence. It would be only 10 foot high. I designed it to look like a country club fence with little vine and flowers growing up on top. We had a big fence a vine planting day of celebration because we had taken them on and we had won. But it was more than that. I had resources, I had attorneys. Once they gave us the go-ahead that UT would allow us to be sued, I now had attorneys. Most of the people that were fighting this fight didn't have diddly squat. And I thought, how can I not fight when I've got all these resources that strengthen my case? They don't stand a chance if I don't take it on. So it was a very, very complicated, and I had people at UT system meetings because it took a year. And I'd go to one of my board meetings and some old hippie would come up to me and put his hands on my shoulders and he'd say, "If you do civil disobedience, I think we should. You call me, I'll be there." And everybody wanted me to do a snake line along the river. And I had thought, no, I'm not going to do any theater. It's just too important. It's not about theater and one-shot deals on the television. It's deeper and more important. But I had lots of people that were silently glad that we had taken them on. So anyway, so there are moments when that happens and you need someone by your side, like my husband was. Not sure of the outcome, but sure that you took the right.
Well, I wasn't sure where this conversation was going to go. And in many ways, I think that the response about your own leadership instinct, the work that you did around that story of knowing you were going to be sued by the federal government because of the border wall. I think what you've done is that your response to what does this mean for women the way of work, your response was not symbolic at all. It was just substantive. It was about, let me tell you a story. So I don't need to tell you about the symbolism, the pageantry of Women's History Month, because for you it hasn't been about the symbolism. It's been about just doing the stuff, doing the work. And so I think that that's probably the best answer. for what,
Sorry.
What do you think of Women's History Month? Well, let me tell you what I did.
Well, I think though Women's History Month is important. I really do, because it is a nod in the right direction, and it does affirm the belief that women are half of the population in the world or more, and how important our role is. So it's not to diminish that at all.
No, and I think what the story that you've shared is, I think, because one implication is, were it not for Women's History Month and all the work that was done through the years, maybe I would not have had the opportunities.
Absolutely. And I was helped by women.
Yes.
I became president of Texas Southmost College because there were 2 women trustees who made sure that I got into the group. Once I was in, the finalist, then they stepped back and, you're on your own. But then when I did get it, they helped me succeed. So women help women all the time. Sometimes we think they don't. But I've been helped by women in strategic positions, whether it was Senator Hutchinson, who wouldn't take a picture with me because she didn't want to be on the fence, with me, but helped me even in the judges' chambers.
That's interesting. She wouldn't take a picture with you?
No,
because
she just said, we'll do that later, Juliet.
It's not good for politics. But Ann Richards would.
No,
because it was good for her.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I wonder what your response was when she told the story of Lily. Do you remember the story at the Democratic National Convention?
Oh.
Like, where were you when she told that story? Because she was slamming George W. Bush.
Yes, she was. Yeah, she was.
It was such a moment, I think, in women's history.
That was a powerful speech.
Yeah. And then the other woman who has been mostly not there, but probably was the most influential of all, was your mother. And she's quite a story. And I think that, her story becomes one of the imagination. Like, I can only imagine.
Okay, so it's so true. I went to go and buy some Asian food the other day in a drive-thru, right? And the gentleman that was took my order, he said, "And your name?" And I said, "Juliet." And he goes, "Oh, what a beautiful name." And I said, "And I have a brother who's named Romeo." And he said, "Oh, my goodness." And he was just all in awe at the moment. And he said, "I would have loved to have met your mother because she had the..." And I thought, how lovely a thought. It wasn't about me having my name or my brother. It was, I would have liked to have known the woman who dared to do that, name her children Romeo and Juliet. So you're right.
The poetry of your mother.
Yes, yeah.
Now, in some ways, she was bound because she married somebody named Romeo.
Yes, I mean, so Romeo was easy, right? Romeo is the junior.
But Julieta
But then when
was
Julieta
a stroke
came
of genius.
Oh. And Mario, my brother, my younger brother, was named after Mario Lanza, the opera singer. So she was,
She hit it out of the park.
She did. She did.
She batted
No
1,000.
accidents.
She went
No
350.
accidents in
Wow.
that
Well,
process.
Julieta, thank you so much for
Al contrario. Thank
for
you.
for doing this and being here and just for being who you are. You've been such a gift.
Oh, thank you.
Well,
Okay,
at least the president thought so.
Okay, I have right. I have to tell you one more thing. I have a granddaughter, the eldest, whose name is Julieta, and that's delicious. I never imagined that. Never imagined that. And she's working on her doctorate at UCLA.
Wow.
In education policy. And then I have 4 other ones that are all brilliant, and one's going to be another Lynn Miranda. We hope, and they're all good kids. So so you don't do this alone.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you, and thank you to the family, also, and to your husband for being supportive, and your father for because I thought about your father, how he attempted to be a father and attempted to be a mother through a father's perspective, and what that would have done to a child and to children. And it's a fascinating case study that your father was, I think. Wow.
He's a good guy.
Okay.
You would have liked him.
All right. Well, that is the March 2024 edition of Museum Pláticas. And, if you didn't catch it, because this is recorded, obviously, and it's posted online. And so anybody can see this anywhere in the world. And so it's going to be there forever. And wow, what a treat. This is Julieta García, who was our guest today. And so thank you, Tony, for recording, and thank you, Pam, for doing the work, behind the scenes. And thank you, friends of the museum, for joining us for this edition of Museum Pláticas. We will see you in April for more interesting and fascinating programming. So long, everyone.